Biking, great. Biking to work, sucks.
There's no way that I'm sitting that close to a guy with bedbugs.
Yeah.
I think it's insane that Mike's shocked that Rachel says no. The will they, won't they that we talked about at the end of last.
I was hoping you'd bring it up.
There's also a backstory. I want to know what that backstory is.
Yeah.
It feels like it's more than just work.
Welcome to Suits on Suits. We're your hosts, Quinn and Jared Mayberry. This is season 1, episode 4. Gosh, can't believe this is episode 4 already.
I know. We're on a ride.
Let's kick off some hot takes. Biking, great. Biking to work, sucks. You are sweaty.
I know.
If you're anything like me, you're sweaty and gross. I know this is true for Jared as well.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a shower at the office.
Amazing.
Yeah, great. But any other way, and I even if I bring an extra shirt, it's going to be problematic.
Totally.
Because I'll change and then be sweating in that.
It's not enough.
It's never enough.
Yeah.
All right. Next hot take from me is I think that Harvey and the company should have made a big apology to the attorney on the other side for calling him an ambulance chaser after all the facts came out.
I have a lot to say about this one. We'll get to some of that later, but that actually segues nicely into my second and final hot take, which is Harvey is a hypocrite on this episode.
Yeah, he whiplashes back and forth.
Yeah, so condescending about Jessica's ex being so self-righteous about doing the right thing.
Yes.
He proceeds to do exactly that in that scene.
Yeah.
He's self-righteous about not taking the case.
Right. My next hot take, when Mike first meets his client, he's sitting across from him at the table. There's no way that I'm sitting that close to a guy with bedbugs. I don't care how much you care.
I love that you brought this up. I wasn't sure if we were going to get to it. There are so many points throughout the episode where I'm like, they're playing fast and loose with these bed bugs.
Oh, it's unbelievable. They're just throwing them around. And Mike at one point casually says, "Oh, I feel like they're crawling all over me." From what I understand about bed bugs, they were incredibly insidious.
Yeah.
And once they take root, you're burning every piece of fabric you've ever owned. And he's just kind of like, "Oh, I guess my back kind of itches."
You know me well enough to know that I wouldn't be in the same room.
Oh my God.
My skin would crawl at the very thought of it. It did, in fact, watching
I'm actually surprised right now Quentin doesn't whip out his little pocket hand sanitizer.
If I had it on me, I'd be using it.
Because during COVID, Quinn had a tick. Anytime someone said COVID, he'd put a little hand sanitizer and clean it off.
Better to be safe than sorry.
The words are dangerous. All right, next.
Boy, do I wish I had my hand sanitizer.
I think it's insane that Mike's shocked that Rachel says no.
Oh,
he definitely had a face like, "Oh yeah, I assume that like we had the witty banter." He's at work. She's at work. The chances,
totally
agree. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take the shot, but I'm just saying that the idea that you think it's a high probability ask is insane.
Great point.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so I'm going to break it out. Per usual, this is season 1, episode 4. The title of the episode is Dirty Little Secrets. Writer credit goes to John Cowan. Director is Denny Gordon. The Netflix summary of the episode is Harvey and Jessica's relationship is tested when Harvey defends someone from her past. In typical fashion, setting aside the last description, accurate but abridged.
Yeah.
Which is kind
more
of
a teaser than a summary, which totally
fair point. That's what I would call it. Yeah, you're exactly right. Knowing all of that, do you have alternative titles?
I didn't write any for this episode, and I'm not seeing them on my outline that I just wrote. So
I have 2. My first one is bugged.
Oh,
so bed bugs, and then bug as a euphemism for digging into Quentin's past.
Nice.
Is the best I came up with. Again, I think Dirty Little Secrets is pretty good.
Yeah.
That's why I understand why you didn't come up with any.
Yeah. It's because they were too good.
Yeah. The title was too good already. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This one was perfect.
Lazy. Next one. Chemistry. Harvey finds out about Jessica's past love life. There is a little spark between Mike and Rachel. And we're talking about pharmaceuticals, so there's some chemistry there.
I actually love that one.
Yeah.
I'd like sitting over here and just chirping at your alternative episodes. I think that one's great.
Okay, so let's dig in to the general discussion then, because this one was a meaty one. There were two primary cases going on: Mike's pro bono case and the pharmaceutical plaintiff's case. Can I just say, like, the way they talk about pro bono is wild to me.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay.
It starts as like a lottery.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was a weird way to kick it off. Yeah. That they would just assign somebody the pro bono case. It just felt a little bit tasteless.
Fair.
That you're competing for this case that they're kind of dishing out. But on the other hand, it's like the winner of a competition has the
best,
honor of
ostensibly.
the best, and somebody has the honor of doing this public service. Yeah, so mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, totally agree.
I think that putting it up to chance and just, not trying to figure out who would be best suited for the case, who has the most bandwidth, who would learn the most from it, and just turning it into a lottery of sorts based on just random trivia was kind of felt a little gauche, a little.
Pro bono is an opportunity, rightly or wrongly, for some more junior folks to get experience in a way that they wouldn't maybe necessarily get with paying clients, because the paying clients wouldn't allow a junior associate to take first chair on a case or something like that.
Yeah, and you're getting representation by somebody who is ostensibly a lawyer. Yes. In this case, not actually a lawyer.
Ooh,
but
good point.
Very capable person.
Yeah. So we're just racking up the number of malpractice cases against the firm at this point.
You're getting representation as opposed to no representation. Yeah. You have a right to counsel in criminal cases, not true in the vast majority of civil cases. There may or may not be some state programs that entitle you to representation, but the general rule is you're not entitled to counsel in a civil case. Yep. And now you have counsel. And so a junior lawyer is going to know so much more about most of these matters and be able to navigate them in a manner that's more competent and effective than somebody who has no legal training.
Yeah, no doubt. They're better off than going it alone. And there is some obligation that they are either an expert in or know the field or learn enough before the case to practice competently. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and great point there. The standard isn't that they know enough, it's that they know enough or they're able to learn enough.
Yeah.
And I find that to often be the case. Most of the time, you're not going to be an expert on all areas of law, but you have the tools to go and learn about it, research the area, and oftentimes be competent.
And this is a bit of a digression, but that is kind of why law school is not taught as a black and white, know the law exercise. It's taught with the Socratic method as a way. And again,
Socratic method is just
good point.
A method of teaching where you learn by the professor asking questions, ultimately driving at some core truth.
You're really trying to push around the edges of and predict what the law will say versus saying the law is X or it is Y. That's not very helpful for the practice. And frankly, in a common law regime, i.e. a regime where you're taking prior decisions and formulating the law based on those prior decisions.
No, I think that's a good point, though. And Holmes talks about law as a prediction about how courts will behave.
Yeah.
And ultimately, lawyers' jobs are helping people navigate this prediction on how the courts will behave.
Exactly.
So back to the case at hand. There is just about no respect for housing court here.
I know. I was thinking the same thing. I was actually, as someone who, my first summer of law school, who worked on truly pro bono cases for helping either affirmative cases where we were suing landlords for having, we'll talk about this later, but breached the implied warranty of habitability, or defense cases where we were defending clients against unlawful detainers.
Commonly known as evictions.
Yeah, commonly known as evictions. So we were, and working in that area, I mean, there were incredible professionals who were incredibly smart and fighting incredibly hard, and they would regularly lose, but they were doing, in my opinion, God's work, trying to make sure that people didn't go from the meager housing that they had to nothing, or if they had Section 8 housing, losing their ability to have future Section 8 housing. And so people were fighting uphill battles every day, very difficult uphill battles every day to keep people in their homes. And it is not easy.
Yeah. Not only is it not easy, but it's also, to your point, incredibly important. I think a lot of sociologists would rightfully argue that it's the foundation for, living a self-actualized life. You build so much on top of stable housing.
Totally.
The ability to get a job, to then try and find a job that you find fulfilling, to have stable interactions with friends and family, to down to literally shelter. You know?
Yeah. So the pro bono piece that I don't totally understand is there are two references. Mike once is talking to the client about whether or not they put the money in escrow, and we'll go back to that. And two, he's talking to Lewis at the very end saying, I got 15 more clients to sign up, and with those 15, that's a decent sized payment. I totally take that I actually think that in some ways this is a contingency fee case, but the idea that it's both a pro bono and a contingency fee case doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So to jump into our topic analysis for this episode, we're going to be talking about unlawful detainers and the affirmative defense of the implied warranty of habitability. An unlawful detainer, or more commonly known as an eviction, is used when a landlord wants to get a tenant out of a rental property. In this case, the landlord has ulterior motives for trying to get the tenant out of the property, and in all likelihood was hoping that the tenant wouldn't pay rent so that the landlord, could file the unlawful detainer, start the eviction process. But generally speaking, it's a good example of when someone would file an unlawful detainer is someone's not paying rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just as a quick aside, people trying to push somebody out of their place for one reason or another is not very far-fetched. That happens fairly often.
Yeah.
I mean, one incredibly common example of this is rent stabilization.
Yeah, agreed. Rent stabilization, or in...
or like in this example where they're trying to improve the property.
That's what I was going to say. In areas where there is some form of rent stabilization and or there is a quick acceleration, or there's a fast acceleration of property value increase. Yeah. Then it changes the dynamics quickly, such that a good deal on rent 2 years ago may feel like a very bad property investment for the landlord. And with a tenant, they lose, and tenants' rights laws, they lose a lot of flexibility around what they do with their property.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, there's a written notice requirement where the landlord notifies the tenant of some kind of breach. For example, something like failure to pay rent or something else.
Yeah.
Which will include a demand for rent and or a demand to move out, generally speaking. After, if the tenant fails to adhere to either of those notices, they're effectively telling the tenant to move out or to take some other action. If they don't adhere to those requests that are legal requests, then the landlord can institute an unlawful detainer, or effectively an eviction process, which can result in some form of law enforcement coming in, enforcing the unlawful detainer or eviction.
Yeah, and these notices are incredibly important.
Yeah.
You have to meet certain requirements based on your jurisdiction. You're going to see different notice requirements from one jurisdiction to the next, but you have to comply pretty strictly with these notice requirements. For example, if you serve a 5-day notice to quit or to leave the premise, whenever you were supposed to serve a 60-day notice or a 30-day notice,
it's defunct.
It's defunct so long as you go in court and argue improper notice.
Yeah.
So you could waive your rights to proper notice by not raising that objection in a legal proceeding.
Yeah.
So it's important to immediately get a hold of somebody, even if it's not a lawyer. Like if you find yourself in this situation, look to self-help tools, give a lawyer a call, because it's oftentimes something you can do in a situation like this.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess kind of to your point, in a lot of ways, the law is very strict and there are rules that you have to follow. And if you don't follow the process, then you don't get the benefit of the substance. But there are plenty of times where the substance trumps
absolutely the procedure, the technical procedure.
And so in this case, this is one where the technical procedure absolutely matters and can be a defense against any kind of action. in that case.
For example, I was just in a situation where we won a directed verdict on behalf of a tenant because the landlord's attorney didn't introduce any evidence about proper notice, and notice was in dispute.
Yep.
And directed verdict meaning just before the conclusion of the trial, even the judge ruled that the landlord and the landlord's counsel hadn't presented enough evidence to prove their case, and therefore the tenant wasn't evicted as a result.
So we just kind of walked through the landlord's right to evict someone or file an unlawful detainer if the tenant's not adhering to the rules. There are plenty of rules protecting tenants, and oftentimes they're colloquially described as tenants' rights. So tenants' rights, they're a big menagerie or web of rules. There are federal rules such as the Fair Housing Act, which is a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. There are state level rules such as in California, the Tenant Protection Act. There are county and city level rules and ordinances, such as in Los Angeles, the Tenant Anti-Harassment Ordinance. And all of these things together codify the set of rules that you have to adhere to as a landlord that give tenants protection against landlords. And one of these concepts that is in almost every state is the implied warranty of habitability, which can't be waived and doesn't need to be in the lease agreement. It's a covenant made by the landlord that the leased premises are suitable living quarters and will be sufficiently maintained during the duration of the lease. In California, for example, it is codified and includes things such as waterproofing and weather protection, plumbing, hot and cold running water, heating, electrical lighting, and pests, and a few other things. So the pests one here is kind of what has come up in this case, because we're talking about bedbugs, which would clearly fall within that prong of the law. So there are two ways to approach this. One is it is a affirmative action that you can take against your landlord if they're not making repairs, updating the property, or two, if they're trying to evict you using a non-lawful detainer, you can assert it as an affirmative defense for not paying rent. And if you win, because there was a material breach, in the using it as an affirmative defense, if you win, then the landlord will have to make the repairs. They'll adjudicate how much rent should have been taken off for that period, and you could be awarded attorney's fees. There are a couple other kind of things to think about here, but this brings me back to the case at hand, which is, in Mike's case, he loses on a technicality. They're claiming that there is a local custom that if you hold back rent because there's been a material breach of the implied warranty of habitability, then the expectation is that the tenant holds that held back rent in an escrow account to show that they have the ability to pay the rent.
And so this is what we learned in law school. So when there's a divide in the law, sometimes there are two common rules. In some jurisdictions, we'll follow the majority rule, and that will be the rule in as the name implies, the majority of jurisdictions, and then the minority rule, which is the less common rule, but still oftentimes a very prevalent rule.
Yep.
I don't know where this falls in that. I don't know if it must have been the majority rule, because that's typically
what they teach in law school.
Yeah, it's what they teach, unless they're teaching to a specific state.
Yeah,
laws.
like if it were the law in Massachusetts for you in Harvard.
Yeah. But we typically learn the majority rule, so I assume that this is common practice.
Yeah, that's my expectation too. Query if they would force you to lose the case if there truly was a material breach of the implied warranty of habitability, thus that you lose your eviction case. Like that, I'd be curious if that is grounds for losing it. Like, do you lose the affirmative defense?
There are so many exceptions to exceptions within the law. You really have to know the law within your specific jurisdiction. There could be an exception to that exception here where it's like, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there's a rule where you have to withhold the funds unless you use the funds to pay for repairs.
Yep.
Like that very possibly is the rule.
That all makes sense to me. The interesting thing to me would be if you're Mike, who finds out that there is a pest problem, and you know that there's either affirmative action or an affirmative defense, why are you waiting for the unlawful detainer to be filed versus filing the affirmative case against the landlord?
Oh, interesting. I just assumed he came on after there was an unlawful detainer action filed against the...
Well, they kind of got the timing wrong because the landlord throws the notice against the wall or against the front door, which is a point that they talk about later because he's stepping up to the carpet but doesn't step on the carpet.
Yeah.
And then he says the sheriff's going to kick you out in 3 days. You're served with notice that you need to be out in 3 days and the sheriff's going to come here. So all of the timing is screwed up.
I didn't think about that while I was watching. Yeah, he probably should have brought the affirmative case here. There's a lot happening there. And I guess one thing that I didn't know before going to law school is oftentimes for a topic like this, there's something like 5 to 15 big concepts.
Yep.
And Jared just did a great job breaking down one or arguably two of those, let's call it in property law, like 10 big concepts. So it's like once you get out and you're practicing and you're going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, yes, there will be differences in the law. But again, once you understand the framework, there's a balance between appreciating how specific it can be, but also appreciating how powerful, understanding the framework for these, let's say 10 big picture concepts can be. So, I mean, was this episode sponsored by Tort Reform? By Big Pharma?
Exactly. I can't wait to hear Quinn's take on this. It is unbelievable how they both trash the plaintiff's attorney, are the absolute menaces and aggressors.
Unreal.
And then still make no apologies for the plaintiffs or the plaintiff's attorneys.
Okay, so calling him an ambulance chaser, didn't love it, but as a plaintiff's lawyer, but fine. If he's bringing these trumped up bogus claims.
Well, you thought he was going to follow through with the storyline. You thought the storyline was going to follow through with that.
I thought so.
That he was leveling.
Yeah, and so I assumed it's
innocent until proven guilty. My ass.
I was expecting these claims to be bogus.
Yeah.
You go on to find out that this company lied
to the
FDA and to all, more importantly, arguably, to all the people taking the drug.
All of them.
About an important side effect where they're going to have liver failure.
Yes.
Potentially deadly liver failure.
Yes.
And then them and the attorney representing them are made out to be
the villains.
These villains that are like money grubbing villains.
It's totally money grubbing. They reference how expensive the suit was. It was obnoxious.
Yeah. And then doing this from this ivory tower.
Yeah, I know.
And making no apologies about it. They're like, well, I guess we're wrong. Here's some scraps of the company.
Yeah, we'll give you some company. The CEO is going to turn this around and solve the problem. If he could solve the problem, like, why are we here? This is like, it doesn't make any sense.
Wild. Yeah. I thought that, by the way, tons of drugs with like horrible side effects are approved because it's worth the risk.
Yes.
But lying to the people and
not
also
known risks are insane.
Also, even if they thought that it was worth taking the drug, like as advanced as modern medicine is, there's probably a drug they could be taking in conjunction with this
to mitigate
the liver failure.
Preach, my friend. Preach.
I'm heated.
He's heated, dude. This is Quinn on fire.
No, but the fallout from this is like absurd. It's criminal. It goes beyond just like defrauding consumers. It's like you're literally killing people and then you're insulting them in the process. I thought it was I was getting
struck a chord with Quinn.
Well, I
struck a chord with me too.
I thought, to be honest, that we were going to find out. So big law firms are more likely to be representing the big corporations.
Yeah, who are able to pay hourly wages.
Exactly. And so I thought that this episode was going to be painting the big law firm and our protagonist at that big law firm as the heroes. So we've never heard of a situation where big drug companies are caught trying to push drugs on the populace. And if we were to throw out a name, is truth an absolute defense to defamation? Yes.
Exactly.
So back to the narrative arc. Pearson Hardman, or the law firm in suits, would be the protagonist in the case.
Totally agree.
Our heroes work there. They're representing the drug company. They tried to muddy the waters a little bit by saying that the CEO actually had an ALS and was pushing for the drug to help more people with ALS.
Well, is that what you actually took? Because the way that I took it was he was pushing it because he needed it, which also kind of fell flat on the argument.
Just at the expense of tons of other people.
But also, he's the head of the company. If he knows what the compounds are, can't he just freaking take the drug?
100%.
I guarantee
that part I was going to gloss over, but I totally agree with you.
Only because the narrative arc doesn't make a lot of sense. Because they try...
Well said.
And it's also saying they're trying to valorize what he did, which was to... And you're even hearing it as to help others. But what they actually say is so that he can take the drug.
100%.
So it's selfish.
I'm trying to paint it in the light most favorable to the company, but I think your points are more accurate than the picture I'm painting. But then even assuming that's true, we find out that these people have been massively defrauded and that the plaintiff's attorney giving these people a fair shake, and by the way, bringing to light what's happening. Yeah. So now there are warnings going forward. And so the company never would have issued this warning, but for this lawsuit. Are people still going to potentially have access to the drug? By the way, if they were sued into bankruptcy, somebody else would buy the IP for the drug and then start creating the drug. Yeah. It's not like that's taking the drug off the market. It's taking some drug producer who's acting as a fraudulent actor, as a bad actor in the marketplace, out of the market.
Agreed.
But I'll make one final point. They also mentioned how the company started generating I think they said 39 million quarterly and
38 I think
something like that.
Yeah,
tons of money. It's like, did that not weigh into their decision at all? That was not a factor whatsoever.
Well, again, it cuts to the point, which is he said he wanted to pass the FDA so that he could take it. He could. As the CEO, I guarantee he had access to the drug compounds. Yeah, it really was to save the company,
and also
maybe once we to take a step back, we figure out they tried to in one fell swoop, right? Because this CEO is Jessica's ex-husband, which we had no idea that she was even dating this guy ever, and
totally glossed over that.
Harvey had no idea. It's his new partner. And they just completely hurl her under the bus. They dispose of her as a way to dispose of the nastiness of their subterfuge.
Yeah. He had no idea that this was happening. She was, I guess, just real quick for context, she was ultimately the one who was hiding the evidence of liver failure.
Yes.
And the FDA test. So really quickly to circle back to a point you were just making about the CEO trying to have access to this drug, the only world where this really makes sense to keep the study going is so that you have human trials and you see how this plays out.
So you have more data.
So you have more data. And then you could even tweak the drug, you could tweak dosing, all of those things, but you're arguably, if it purely is for
his
him
life
and his life, the only reason he'd want to keep the study going is so he had these human studies.
Yeah.
And more data.
So basically it's selfish and it's selfish and it's selfish.
And that man is owed an apology.
That's what I'm saying.
And more importantly, each one of those plaintiffs is owed an apology.
That's the real problem. They kind of gloss over this, and I think they as a storytelling mechanism, they distance you from the real victim, because then they can toy around with how they create the solution that feels right for everyone. Yeah. But the real victim here is these people who truly had, it's the family of the people who had the liver failure, because I think most of them passed away. So that's a travesty, in my opinion.
And then throwing them a bone at the end by flipping them into the company through some stake in the company. I thought it was a nice feel good finish.
It fit from a narrative arc perspective. Yeah. But let's put it this way: if I'm a plaintiff and I was annoyed that they had done this and they were keeping the management in place, is there any chance I want to be along for that ride?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's no.
Yeah,
it's a no for me.
I would have had so much respect for both the show writers and Harvey if they would have done the exact same thing, but at the end acknowledged some wrongdoing.
Yes.
Could have kept it totally messy. Plaintiffs don't have to be like the heroes of the episode.
No, definitely.
But just acknowledge that maybe they don't just automatically have the moral high ground in every scenario.
Maybe taking a step back and transitioning a little bit, because there were two storylines going on here. One was obviously the case, but two was Jessica and her ex-husband. How do
Yeah.
you feel about her not telling Harvey, like literally being married to a man that Harvey doesn't know they were married, doesn't even know that this man existed, has no understanding of the connection. And then two, kind of her feeling, it's almost like she put him up on a pedestal as like,
absolutely.
yeah. And and I think kind of that she was the one who failed him because she was too ambitious, which also talks to
Victim blaming a little bit.
Victim blaming, well, herself.
Yeah.
Victim blaming and her shame around gender norms.
Yeah.
Right. And then some kind of resurrection of their love life again through understanding that he is not a saint. But I'd be curious to hear kind of your take on the relationship.
I was maybe a bit sidetracked by the other plot line.
We couldn't tell.
So I glossed over this one a little bit. I thought that like Harvey taking a case
Yes.
where he has less than perfect information, where a more senior partner essentially dumps a case on him, didn't seem surprising.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. But the idea that he'd never have heard of this person, I think a nice like narrative trick to create some surprise in the episode. And
Also to put it, he thinks that they're as close as anyone can be, but he doesn't actually know her personal life at all.
fair point. And I think maybe that's the most interesting part here, getting at the relationship. It's like, what is the relationship between Harvey and Jessica?
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see that play out. Right now, Jessica is kind of seems to be on a bit of an island, sitting above everybody else. We talked about on a previous episode how she was playing chess while everybody else was playing checkers,
Yep.
pitting Harvey and Lewis against each other. So that's an interesting point. I guess, really, I think that this starts to get at who these characters are.
Yeah.
We see them as, you mentioned this in the first episode, I guess we both did, where they're almost superheroes.
Yeah.
And we're not really seeing behind the suit, maybe as much as...
No, totally.
Yeah.
It's starting to make me wonder, like, when are we going to see the cracks of Harvey? Like, it's clear that they're building up that his professional life doesn't really have vulnerabilities. So when are we going to see the vulnerabilities of his personal life? And maybe this is a foreshadowing that, Jessica and Harvey need to be a little more open.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I think that's really well said. I'd be excited to see a little bit more vulnerability. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, they have to build him up before they can show the vulnerability.
Totally.
Because he is the rock for a lot of people. Like, I guess maybe even to counter my point a little bit, it's like we're going to see a lot of vulnerability in the show as a character, the show itself with Mike. He's clearly going to have the ups and downs, and that's where we're seeing it. Harvey's kind of this mentor who's the rock for him in a lot of ways. So I wonder if it's going to take Mike kind of settling for us to see it in Harvey.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense from a storytelling point of view.
Yeah. That feels a little too messy for whether or not this is true in a law firm, what is supposed to be like a stable, like you think of your lawyer as a counselor, someone who you come to when there are troubled waters. And so there is a limit to how much chaos you can have.
Well, and that's a really interesting point. So I feel like, I mean, every Superman movie I can think of, Superman is saving the day in probably the opening scene.
You don't start with kryptonite.
You don't start with kryptonite. And so that makes sense. I think there's a good chance we'll be exposed to that later.
Well, I guess what they're trying to do is build credibility before the falter totally discredits it's so that the falter doesn't totally discredit their subsequent rise.
Yeah.
Because you want to believe that they're so good that the rise is inevitable. How they rise is going to be the story, but the rise is inevitable. But if you start with them being structurally unsound, the rise doesn't feel as obvious.
That makes sense. And I think it really speaks to the power of first impressions here.
100%. That's a very good point.
Let's talk about the legal accuracy. What's your score for this episode?
Well, I was going to get pretty aggressive on this one. So I went 1 out of 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Where'd you go with?
I waffled on this.
I thought you were going to give a negative number based on those rants you were giving.
Yeah, I went with like 1.5 or 2.
Okay.
I think I tried to swing back towards the middle.
Yeah. You're trying to compensate for credibility.
I was trying to compensate for credibility. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I also thought that they got a couple of things right. So, okay, one thing in the pharma context, it is really hard to develop a new drug.
Yeah.
Putting a lot of emphasis on that fact felt fair.
One question I had about, before we go a little bit further, is about your take that drugs are really hard to make. How does that tie into kind of the legal accuracy of this section?
I guess ultimately it's just an appreciation for the fact that there's this balancing test.
Yeah.
Maybe not a legal balancing test,
Yeah.
although you see plenty of those. It's this balancing test on utility against cost and all cost.
Yeah.
Cost to develop, but I guess more germane to this discussion, the side effects.
Yeah.
And so we have a tolerance for side effects. You just have a duty to warn.
Yeah.
And you have a duty to follow all these procedures so we have a better understanding of what the side effects are. And ultimately, so that a panel can make a decision about whether or not those side effects are warranted.
Yep.
And whenever you defraud the consumers like this, you're totally stealing the FDA or the consumer's ability to make these educated choices. And so
Agreed.
Throwing them a bone in the sense that they are really hard to develop, and they can have, I guess the second half of that sentence is, and they can have enormous utility, and it's an incredibly important like social function that these companies are serving. And so it's just, this isn't like a hit on big pharma. It's, they defrauded the consumers.
It's clear. The problem is clear.
Yeah. So what else did they get right? Whenever they came down on, better yet, whenever the judge came down on Mike in housing court, I thought that was potentially accurate. A lot of judges are going to give you much more leeway than that and be far more, patient, but some might not be. And some judges can be very particular about following the appropriate rules of decorum in their courtroom, and Mike wasn't.
No, I thought that that's a very good point. That was like some cultural and procedural accuracy points that I could have thrown them.
And finally, like, it's a corny one, but there's so much coffee throughout the episode. Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, caffeine in the law feels very
I don't think a
right.
law firm works for that caffeine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how it got up to 2, I'll call it.
Okay. I'll give it to you. No. So then I think from what they got wrong perspective, my first one is calling this case a pro bono case. We already kind of touched on it, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but this to me just rang hollow. It didn't feel right.
Yeah.
The second one that I thought was not very accurate is like Harvey besmirching these plaintiffs, or actually besmirching the plaintiffs' counsel for quote unquote recycling plaintiffs. If he included this same plaintiff in 2 separate pharmaceutical claims just to put a warm body there, that clearly is wrong and unethical and would be rooted out in any kind of case. Like, it'd be pretty clear to challenge it. But if the plaintiff was wronged in 2 pharmaceutical cases because they took pharmaceutical drugs or protocols that were prescribed by their doctor, I don't see the problem there.
I'm totally with you on this. And I think that, by the way, for these really serious diseases, oftentimes people are taking this whole cocktail of drugs.
And oftentimes ones that are new.
Yeah.
Yeah. That we don't know the side effects yet. And so they're taking a risk and assuming that the risks that are known are disclosed to them.
So all good points. And I guess as a quick aside, I just want to make it very clear that drug companies don't have an obligation of creating drugs with no side effects.
Yes.
That couldn't be further from the truth. It's not like you create this amazing life-saving drug, but there are some side effects, and now you're open to tons of legal exposure.
Yeah. If that were the case, then we would not have any advancement in the pharmaceutical business whatsoever.
Yeah.
Pharmacology would be dead. My final one, and we kind of already touched on this, is the timing of the notices for the Unlawful Detainer case. You know, the landlord came, he threw up the notice that was not really a notice. He's right that you can throw up a notice and then there should be some adherence by the tenant, but he's throwing it up and saying that the sheriff's going to come and then they're going to have a court case afterward. That timing doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's time for my favorite section of this podcast.
Uh-oh.
I am going to put on a Harvard trivia quiz for our boy Quinn. Harvard is the oldest law school in the country and was founded in what year?
Is that easy?
It is
1817.
That is exactly right. Ding, ding, ding.
Did not look that up. The only reason I knew that was because I was my first year of law school.
That's why it was supposed to be easy.
Yeah, was the bicentennial.
That must have been a crazy time.
Wild.
Yeah.
There was a panel of, I think it was five current senators, 6 Supreme Court justices came, 5 current Supreme Court justices
That's
at the
insane.
time. There were a handful of, other prominent politicians, business leaders. I think the Attorney General was there. Merrick Garland, who wasn't the Attorney General at the time, was there. It was crazy. It felt incredibly surreal as a kid
imagine.
from Kirksville, Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, the power center of it, the gravity of it all must be insane.
Yeah,
All right.
as well.
Question 2. The pedagogical system that creates anxious and sweaty law students, the Socratic method, was first used in law school by which Harvard Law School professor and dean?
Oh,
I don't think you're going to get this one.
this one's tough. And by tough, I mean I have no idea. Wait, that's not quite right. I think this is somebody who has a building named after them at Harvard.
I don't know.
Oh.
1492.
Columbus?
Warmer.
Oh my God. This is killing me because I think I might actually be able to get this one with enough time. By that I mean
Christopher Columbus. Langdell.
Oh man. So Langdell Hall is the library.
Yeah.
I think I heard that one on a tour once, and unlike Mike, I do not have a photographic memory.
Yeah.
I heard that one once, like 8 years ago, and didn't keep that in the back pocket.
Well, Harvard doesn't have the most famous or infamous, depending on your political leaning, Supreme Court justice of the last 100 years. That man went to Berkeley Law School. My question to you is, how many of the current Supreme Court justices went to Harvard Law School?
Oh, that's easy. 4.
That is correct. Now, next question. Can you name them?
I think so. And I'd be embarrassed if I couldn't.
You should be.
There's Chief Justice John Roberts.
Yep.
Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yep.
Neil Gorsuch.
Yep.
And Elena Kagan.
Ding, ding, ding. Quinn is 2-1 right now. 2-1, baby. How many sitting U.S. senators are HLS alumni?
This is a bit of a trick question because I think Elizabeth Warren could easily be lumped into this group.
Yeah, like it could be easy for you to assume
As a professor.
anyone who's affiliated with HLS, but
She
no.
spoke at her graduation. She was a professor there for a
Yeah,
period.
it's cool. It's cool. It's cool. I saw her there.
I had
We
brunch
met.
at her house.
No way.
Yeah.
Damn, that's very cool.
Her husband, Bruce Mann, was my property professor.
Very cool.
Great property professor. Just great professor. Okay.
I was going to say great professor because property sucks.
I loved it. Okay. So with Elizabeth Warren, it would be 9. Without her, 8.
There you go. Damn, that's impressive. I actually did not think you were going to get that one.
Yeah. The number is startling.
Yeah, it's
8% of.
It's insane.
Yeah.
One more serious question, one kind of a fun question. So how many U.S. presidents went to HLS?
I know. It's 2.
Damn. Okay. Who are they?
It's Hayes and Obama.
Yep, you got it. Very, very well done.
Hayes, I believe, received an LLB, and obviously Obama received his JD from Harvard.
That is
I
correct.
say that to try and stave off any questions about year of graduation.
Fair point. There is a professor, let's call him a lecturer, at Berkeley Law School, and he has a room named after him at both Harvard and Berkeley. What is the name of the room, and what is the room itself in substance?
Oh, I'm dying over here because I know it. We joke about this all the time. So it's the bathroom.
Yes, it is the bathroom. Now, Quinn, can you get the name of the bathroom right?
The phallic bathroom.
Phallic men's bathroom.
Phallic men's
well
bathroom.
Done.
Yes, came through.
Go, Quinn. Well done.
Shoot. Okay. Well, Jared, I have some questions for you.
I did not study at all, so I'm going to get all these wrong.
Yeah, I felt like it was only fair to shoot a couple back at you. Who was the Berkeley law grad who served as the Chief Justice presiding over one of the country's most liberal courts?
Earl Warren, who graduated from Berkeley, was a governor of California and then was appointed by, I think, Lyndon B. Johnson. No, not Lyndon B. Johnson, by Dwight Eisenhower.
I think that's right.
As a Republican.
Yeah.
Even though he resided over a very liberal choice or a court, such as some decisions are Brown v. Board of Education and Roe v. Wade.
That was a A+ answer. So yeah, I was about to go on to say the Warren Court was best remembered for expanding civil rights, civil liberties, judicial power, and federal power in the way courts interacted with other branches of government.
Yeah.
Your answer is better, quite frankly. Here's more of a cultural one.
Let's hear it.
If you're actually a Berkeley law grad, you'll know this. What is passed out on Amjur Day, commonly called Outline Exchange Day or Outline Day? And I hope my friends that I texted about this did not lead me astray.
They didn't. This is actually one of the greatest traditions of all time. You're a first-year law student going into your first set of finals. And let's give you some background. So when you're going in law school, most law schools and most courses in law school, the only grade that matters is the final. So you study all year or all semester. You don't take a single practice test. You don't see any kind of gauge. There's no ability to average out scores. There's one test that you take for 3 to 5 hours and you turn it in, and that's your entire grade.
Yeah.
And so going into finals, you taking an.
So in the interest of time, I'll ask you one final question. Which Berkeley not law student played Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird? America's Lawyer.
Yeah, who is it? What's his name?
He won an Oscar in 1962 for his depiction of Atticus Finch.
Oh, I know. Gregory Peck.
Nailed it.
Oh, smooth.
There was an interesting tie-in that I'm not going to bother framing as a question here, but point of interest for both of us. So the popular book and then recently came out as a movie, Boys in the Boat.
Great book. If you've never read the book,
fantastic.
I cried at least 6 times.
It was hell of a book. So one of the famous rowing coaches, Kai Albright, was a rowing coach at Berkeley.
Yep.
While Gregory Peck was a student there.
Oh, and Gregory Peck was on the team?
Yeah, and he rowed for him.
No way. And Berkeley was famously one of the best rowing teams in the country. Yeah.
Harvard was another one.
Harvard and Berkeley were two of the top teams.
Didn't quite live up to Berkeley's fame in that series.
Well, it depends on the time of the years that it occurred.
But yeah, Gregory Peck made a $25,000 donation in his honor at a time where that was a hell of a lot more money than $25,000.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So what are you excited to see play out?
Yeah, great question. So I think the will they, won't they that we talked about at the end of last.
I was hoping you'd bring it up.
Episode is definitely at the top of the list. We got to see where this goes, because for me it was kind of like I think the inevitability of it has now occurred. The way she talked about it, I can't do this. There's also a backstory. I want to know what that backstory is.
Yeah,
because it feels like it's more than just work.
Couldn't agree more. And at the risk of being boring, that's what I'm looking forward to seeing.
One other point that I'm excited about saying, I think it's inevitable that Mike gets found out to some degree. And so like, I want to know how they're going to get comfortable or play that out.
Same. And he talks about that early on in the episode after the trivia, whenever he didn't know the name of the pizza place. Yeah. And it's like,
that was a foreshadowing to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also it'd be crazy if it doesn't continue to come up.
Yeah,
or if it isn't confronted.
Who lets it out though? Who do you think?
Lewis.
You think it's Lewis? Yeah. Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
Well, that's
God, what a heel.
What a heel. Lewis lit. Well, that's season 1, episode 4 of Suits on Suits. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. And if you like this episode, please like and subscribe, comment.
Also, feel free to comment and leave some notes. That would be a huge help.
We'll respond as much as we can. Yeah. Thank you so much.
See you next time.